So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We now proceed to the second session, which is on attracting FDI in apparel manufacturing in South Asia. This session will be moderated by Mr. Matthijs Crietee, Secretary General, International Apparel Federation, IAF, and the eminent panelists for this session are Mr. Kihak, Chairman and CEO, Youngone Corporation, and Dr. Christian Schindler, Director General, ITMF. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished moderator, Mr. Crietee, is the Secretary General of the International Apparel Federation, IAF, the Netherlands. IAF is the umbrella body of the apparel industry associations worldwide, and Mr. Crietee has been successful in boosting the membership through his networking skills. And ladies and gentlemen, for your kind information, we also have a parallel session running on building blocks for creating a strong technical textile ecosystem, which will be chaired by Ms. Roop Rashi, Textile Commissioner, Ministry of Textiles, Government of India. And I now hand over to our distinguished moderator for this session, Mr. Matthijs Crietee, Secretary General, International Apparel Federation. Over to you, sir, for your opening remarks and to carry forward the proceedings of the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to our panel discussion on attracting FDI in textile and apparel manufacturing in the Indian subcontinent. I am very honored to first introduce our distinguished panelists. Mr. Kihak is the Chairman and CEO of Youngone Corporation. Youngone is a publicly listed Korea-based company, engaged in the manufacture of a wide range of sports and outdoor clothing, shoes, and related goods. As one of the largest manufacturers of apparel in the world, it owns facilities in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in China, and in El Salvador, hiring over 70,000 local employees. So Mr. Sung is very well placed to comment on the topic of this panel discussion. Mr. Sung is also the chairman of KOFOTI, the Korean Federation of Textile Industries, and he's the immediate past president of the ITMF, which provides a nice bridge to the next distinguished panelist, Dr. Christian Schindler. He's the Director General of the ITMF, the International Textile Manufacturers Federation, based in Zurich, Switzerland. The ITMF, as you probably well know, is an international forum for the world's textile industries, dedicated to keeping the worldwide membership constantly informed through surveys, studies, publications, participating in the evolution of the industry value chain, and through the organization of annual conferences and publications. With both gentlemen, I will discuss the topic of this panel discussion, attracting FDI in textile and apparel manufacturing in the Indian subcontinent. Now, FDI, particularly, I think, but we will hear in the discussion that the textile industry is a hugely important topic for several reasons. Obviously, the diversification of the fiber base in India is very important for the entire supply chain leading up to the apparel industry, which then has a broader fiber base to choose from. FDI also brings in additional knowledge, additional skills to the industry. But FDI is also an indicator, I would think, of the competitiveness of the industry. Attracting FDI shows that the business climate in the particular industry in that country is good, is strong. So FDI has different phases, and therefore it's good that we are able to discuss the details of it in India with these two very knowledgeable gentlemen. Before I start asking questions, I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Matthijs Crietee. I'm the Secretary General of the International Apparel Federation. So with Dr. Schindler, representing the ITMF. We have here two global federations in this panel representing the entire apparel and textile supply chain. We are an organization with associations representing the apparel industry based in over 40 countries. Our head office is in the Netherlands. Right, now let me dive into the questions that we have prepared for our panelists, and the first question I will ask to both Chairman Sung and Dr. Schindler, but I will start with Mr. Sung. The question is, do you anticipate significant FDI in the textile and clothing industry in the Indian subcontinent in the coming 2 to 3 years? And perhaps most importantly, what factors in your mind will drive the trend of attracting that FDI? Chairman Sung.
Well, I don't know whether I'm the person who know a lot about this trend, but as I'm operating in Indian subcontinent last 41 years, especially in Bangladesh, and also I'm in discussion with our investment plan in India. I should say that because of a global market, after some disruption after COVID-19, it may be rather slow, for any companies to make a decision to go to a new destinations, especially because Indian subcontinent, especially India, takes a little bit long time to make terms and conditions, and so it will take a few years for such decisions. So I do not expect that there will be a huge influx of FDI to Indian subcontinent this time. So I am a little bit not so optimistic about this one. Though there may be some companies who has already established the relationship, might be investing, a lot as an extension of their former establishment and then investment.
Thank you, Chairman Sung. That is clear. That makes the distinction between companies that have already invested and can extend that in investment, as opposed to companies that start from fresh. Dr. Schindler, would you like to comment on that with your views?
Thank you, Matthijs, for this kind introduction, and thank you for having me. I think there are some trends that support more investments in the subcontinent in general that are happening at the moment, which are, among others, rising labor costs in China, which encourage companies, to move out of China and look for more attractive destinations. We have observed that in several segments of the industry in several countries. Bangladesh, as Chairman Sung just said, is certainly one of the countries. Vietnam and India certainly has the potential as well. Another trend that is supporting investments that are going in various countries out of China is, of course, also the diversification of sourcing risks. Many of the brands and retailers have sourced predominantly from China and have realized that the diversification is not sufficient in case of risks that arise, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a trade conflict. So these trends certainly support additional investments in the textile and apparel industry in the future. Of course, to increase investments, especially foreign direct investments in the subcontinent or in India specifically, it's important that the overall competitiveness of India's export industry has to improve. There are, of course, some global players in India, well known to all of us, but compared to the big competitor in China, it's only a relative small number of big companies that really have a dominant place in the export of textiles and apparel. So what are the advantages, the inherent advantages of India? Well, definitely, and most importantly, the availability of skilled labor and unskilled labor, both, but most of all, the relatively low labor costs in India. Secondly, they have, of course, very knowledgeable and experienced entrepreneurs in India itself. Of course, FDIs like Chairman Sung's investments in any country bring, of course, additional new knowledge and more importantly, even new competition, which again helps other companies, domestic companies, to improve their services and their quality to meet the export standards. And then you mentioned that already, the availability of raw materials is there in India in terms of fibers. Of course, all the supply chain is there as well, but of course not as well and as largely established as in China so far. And then finally, a huge domestic market, potentially with a growing middle class. So these are the advantages. So what has to be improved, and I'm sure that Chairman Sung will dive into that later on. But from a bird view, from an association like ITMF, you know, infrastructure is a big issue in India. You know, there is a saying that it's cheaper to bring a container from Mumbai to Shanghai than from Mumbai to the south of India on land. The labor laws certainly have not been very attractive in the past to create large-scale companies because of all the labor regulation that make it very difficult to manage such huge labor forces, and very expensive in case of trouble. Export markets are difficult for Indian companies compared to other countries to really conquer because of missing attractive FTAs with many countries. And finally, we hear a lot that red tape is still a big issue in India. You know, it takes too long. Chairman Sung mentioned it. Too long to get approval, too complicated. Corruption certainly also is mentioned very often on several levels, which just is not appealing to foreign direct investors that are not used to this market. And to your second question, which was referring to the apparel and clothing industry investments, I think India should really dominate its focus on apparel. Because apparel is a labor-intensive industry and segment where you can reach in a relatively short span of time a lot of investments if the conditions are given, and employ a lot of people. And all the other segments will follow the apparel investment. So there should be a big pull effect from any apparel investment upstream to the textile investments.
Right. So thank you very much for that, Chairman Sung and Dr. Schindler. This is highly interesting. I think in a very brief amount of time, you've given a lot of stuff to think about, a lot of material to think about. I hear the factors are there favoring India. I also hear constraints that are there, but very clear pointers how things can be managed and improved so that more FDI can be attracted, and a very strong message regarding the connection between apparel and textiles, where Dr. Schindler says that the apparel industry can act as a pull factor, drawing in further investments from textiles. I hear also an interesting take also on FDI, looking at competition boosting, whereby the additional competition, the additional also knowledge brought in from companies from outside helps to boost the competitiveness, the competitive power of the domestic companies. So thanks a lot for all of those insights. Let me take you to the next question, which I will ask to Chairman Sung. And I think we now have the great opportunity to learn from you, in the sense that with Youngone, because you operate manufacturing facilities in 5 countries, you often face the decision in which country to invest, which country to select. So in your mind, what would be the top 3 criteria for selecting a particular country? What makes you select that country, Chairman Sung?
First of all, I cannot confine it into 3, so I may say 5 or 6.
That's okay.
You know, it's not in an order of importance only, but it's linked to each other. So, as Christian just mentioned, it's infrastructure is very important, be it physical infrastructure or political infrastructure, political or administrative infrastructure. That is very, very important. And next could be a market access, be it more FTA or geographical market access, or lead time. These are essential consideration we are making when we make any investment. And then we do make a mistake not really evaluating properly. Past records of our investment was like that. Then, as I mentioned, that is a government support as well as efficiency is very, very important here. Efficiency, government efficiency. This is very, very important. Of course, I cannot, exclude the cost of labor, also labor, regime, be it, legal or this mentality of the people. This labor situation is very, very important. So these are about 5-6 different items we consider when we are making investment. So I must say that a lot of investment outside of from China goes to Vietnam. So we can also make a comparison table between Vietnam or Indian subcontinent or any other countries to understand how this global textile business is moving, and a lot of them are moving to Vietnam. So this is what I can say at this moment.
Thank you, Chairman Sung. And really, this is probably the best information available. There's no arguing with an industrialist having already made the decisions, and those factors, certainly infrastructure, market access, lead time, labor in different aspects are hugely important factors. And I think your suggestion to compare with other countries and understand why sometimes flows of investments are going to one country and less to another are very instructive. I also note your comment on lead time, which might be becoming relatively more important, but which is also one which is difficult, because on the one hand it is connected to physical location, which you cannot change, and on the other hand it is connected to a very complex set, I think, of operations and processes within companies that can enhance lead times, but that are complex to change, but hugely important. So thank you for that comment. Now let me turn to Dr. Schindler again, where if we look at FDI, it's also good to see what is happening now, and what ITMF often does very well is to look at the investments and the shipments made by the textile machinery sector, because those textile machinery flows clearly show where the investments in the textile industry are going, and with extensive and long-standing research, ITMF has a very good view of that. So, Dr. Schindler, how was 2020 with regard to those shipments of textile machinery? What's the outlook for this year and for 2022?
Well, thank you for the question. ITMF's publication, International Textile Machinery Shipment Statistics, is published every year. So at the moment, we are compiling the data for last year. So it's not available yet. But it is safe to say, I would say, that 2020 will be a very bad year when looking at global shipments of new textile machinery. It is important to note, nevertheless, that already in 2019, so the year prior to the pandemic, saw a decline in shipments compared to the year 2018. With other words, we found ourselves in a downturn cycle that was intensified by the pandemic in 2020, which started already at the end of 2018, according to our shipment numbers. On a global scale, looking at India, India is the second largest investor in new textile machinery. The largest investor during the last 15 years, since the end of the quota regime in 2004, was constantly China, which was responsible for 50 to 70% of global shipments, depending on the textile machinery segment. So China's investments, to put it into perspective, in new textile machinery are usually 5 times higher than India's. Only in spinning, this factor is significantly smaller. The factor is there between 2 and 3 times compared to China. So what do these numbers tell us? I think they tell us that India, being such a huge country like China, population-wise, and also a huge territory and a huge tradition, has an enormous potential in textiles and apparel. When looking at another ITMF publication, the so-called International Production Cost Comparison study that we do every other year, and compare textile production costs in dollars and cents, we can see that India is already less expensive than China in all of these segments. But in other competing countries, like Chairman Sung mentioned, like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Egypt, or Indonesia, production costs are in the same range or lower. So the potential is enormous. but things have to work out for any investment into new machinery, in the expansion of the capacities in India, as we have mentioned before. Companies will come and invest if they can earn money and be competitive compared to other regions and countries. And therefore, India still has to do some work to improve its competitiveness compared to other countries. It has the potential to become, theoretically, the next China, given the size. But to do that, it really has to look, as you said, how other countries have succeeded in doing that in different segments, whether it's China in textiles and apparel, or Vietnam, as Chairman Sung mentioned, in apparel production, or Bangladesh, for that matter, which is exporting more apparel than India, which theoretically should not be the case, given the size differences.
Great, thank you, Dr. Schindler, for that answer, giving the insight in the figures, where the figures show the potential also, right? So if you say that the exports, the investments of China are consistently almost 5 times that of the runner-up, then if it would be 4 times or 3 times as much, that means an enormous potential for the other players. But to grab that potential requires a lot of work and many factors that have to collaborate to form a strong foundation. I would imply from your answer. I would like to focus now in another question on one particular, I think, policy initiative or one particular way the Indian government is working to attract that FDI, and those are 2 flagship schemes, the mega textile parks and PLI scheme, the production linked incentive scheme. So the question is, and again, I would like to ask the question to both Chairman Sung and Dr. Schindler. What are the impacts? What do you see are the impacts of those flagship schemes, the mega textile parks and the production linked incentive scheme? Chairman Sung, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I understand India tries to make textile complexes so that from clothing industry to textiles, and then those accessory industries in one complex. I think this is a very good idea that Indian government take out to the world, world investors. But on the other hand, those incentives I have experienced with the Indian government is very comprehensive, but it's very difficult to understand. Also, sometimes it's complicated. I don't know how that will be administrated effectively. That is the concern of India investment. Anyway, however, that we have decided to invest in Bangladesh, despite that, and then, of course, we expect some challenges there. But on the other hand, on trying to bring those other industries which are supportive each other because of Indian reputation about the foreign direct investment, many I failed to really bring them together. So it will be a little bit uphill battle, but we are trying, to bring other industries supportive each other to India. That is, so this incentive many different incentives does not attract FDI. The comfort of the investors is most important. And then also simplicity will help their simplicity of the incentive may be very useful. So if any complicated incentive systems and then will not be as effective as it is on the paper. So I hope that Indian FDI seekers should understand it and then do it a little bit more effectively that way. Maybe next Christian may be able to do better explanation about it.
Christian, the word is to you. This was an excellent answer, I think, which is very useful. But I'm still giving the word to you, Christian.
Yes, thank you. And of course, I don't have much to add to Chairman Sang, who has such an experience in so many different countries and has been so successful in those countries. So he's certainly the right person to ask what is required for a successful investment environment. And I think it's also for me striking to hear how important the comfort factor is for an investor. Despite all the hard facts, that have to be in place and given to be able to produce also in a competitive way to foreign or domestic competitors. FDI really happens if there is trust between partners, and Chairman Sung expressed this so really directly that I'm really stunned, because that was of course nothing that I, not having invested myself, ever experienced. And you need to ask people who actually did it to hear this sentence. I don't know also these the details of the mega parks and the production linked incentive schemes. I don't know these details well enough to really comment on them in detail. But as I said before, just to create a big mega park and just to provide some incentives is not enough if other factors are not considered as well by the government. And one important I think aspect is certainly simplicity and also reliability, because obviously foreign direct investments and any investment want to have a certain time horizon that is stable and that is reliable. As Chairman Sang said, I would just like to emphasize, and maybe Chairman Sang can also comment on that it's important to, in India's case, to focus on apparel FDI, and then the upstream investments like dyeing and finishing and weaving and knitting, they will come along if the apparel investment makes sense, and if there is enough volume to be supplied to a large apparel demand, so to say. So if there is a successful apparel investment that needs a lot of fabrics that can be produced locally, that's very important. But at the same time, one has to mention, and maybe again Chairman Sung is the better person to comment on that it's important for apparel producers also to have access to any fabrics, whether it's from the country or imported, because they can't wait until the supply chain is capable of producing every single type of fabric. They need to be able to import fabrics from any country, literally, to be able to produce also any type of apparel at a very quick in a very quick time. Maybe Chairman Sung can comment on that aspect, as he is obviously much more experienced in that area.
Yes, Christian, I think that's a very good point that you raised, and I would indeed like to ask Chairman Sung on that particular point of the flexibility of sourcing the fabrics.
Well, I think Christian has very well covered, most of these aspects of foreign direct investment. And yes, I want to re-emphasize the comfort level, as well as simple support, rather than complicated, messages. That I think is very important. And then I must emphasize here again how important it is to bring apparel manufacturing or export to the country, so that can create consumption or of local fabrics, or which is already existing, or improvement of a local component, or investment in new component which is necessary for apparel sector to be successful. And but on the other hand, as Christian rightly mentioned, flexibility and then agility is a very, very important factor for these global operators require to enjoy. So any restrictions of any kinds for its components supply, be it from overseas or domestic, will be very, very difficult to manage within the time frame of our business administration. So it is very important that you leave these clothing makers to more flexibly and then more freely, so that it is not designed by the government, but market will naturally follow to supply these clothing makers. Then all other industries coming along. So for India, of course, I have one message that you need more integration of synthetic and cotton and then other fibers, fiber product, so that you can offer more than just cotton goods or other simple goods, but you may have to be able to offer, be it cotton, be it synthetic, something in between, mixture of it. All this should come along so that we can meet the changing requirement of the world market within very short time. That is one I want to say here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Sung, and thank you, Dr. Schindler, for being very clear on saying that the apparel industry is a hugely important pulling factor. If I may look from the experience of IAF, changing market demand, we really see the huge importance now and in future of this flexibility. There's a huge economic ratio for that, because what the industry is suffering from is the mismatch between supply and demand at retail end. So we sometimes say too much clothing that nobody wants to buy and too little clothing in the stores that people do actually want to buy. And connecting the supply and the demand better, that requires the flexibility of the apparel manufacturers, that requires actually also new types of investments in clothing manufacturing, which sees more integration with the textile industry. Because to give one example, you can imagine if you want to connect supply and demand better, it would be a good idea to postpone the moment that you actually make the product customer specific. So at the very last moment, you do digital printing, for instance, only when you actually know the demand from the customer, so that there's less chance that you come up with the wrong design. Now that requires a form of integration that is again a huge, we think, opportunity for the entire industry. And with that approach, with that attracting those kind of apparel manufacturing, boosting that kind of apparel manufacturing, which is flexible and which is able to react really quickly to demand, along with the textile industry, having the ties with the textile industry, then feeds back to giving India a big advantage, because the textile industry is already there. And if you expand it with different fibers, it only becomes more nimble and flexible. But again, that requires the right type of investments. So thank you for bringing up the apparel industry. Obviously, very interesting from my perspective. Now, we have covered different aspects together of the FDI. I'm looking at the clock. We have a little bit of time left to get some questions, to take some questions from the audience. I have seen some questions coming in. So I would like to just have brief answers from the panelists on some of these questions that have come in. Let me ask this question that I have here to Chairman Sung. We already discussed trade agreements. There is an Indo-Korea FTA, free trade agreement, but in spite of this free trade agreement, garment exports from India to South Korea have a low market share. So how could that Indian market share of garment exports be increased in Korea?
I think Korea's main supply chain was formerly between China and Korea. Majority of our clothing, ready-made garments imported are from China. But now this is moving to Vietnam. So we are importing more clothing from Vietnam than from China. Of course, Bangladesh is joining there because of also free duty-free import of Bangladesh garments to Korea. That we are making a lot of effort to export our clothing from Bangladesh to Korea. So, for instance, our most popular clothing we sell in Korean market under the name of the North Face brand, that we can order, say, order the garment, and then in some cases, because all material as well as everything is made in Bangladesh, we can get it within 1 month time. So we can always service our market in that way. So India, of course, there is a chance to export textiles as well as clothing, cotton goods, but there are not much business there. But this is area we can look into and then promote. But sometimes we have, because of its remoteness, we have a very difficult time to handle as well as supervise this kind of quality, etc. So that once we make our own investment in Bangladesh, in India, we would be able to hopefully export a lot of clothing to Korea.
Right. Thank you. I hear another advantage of an FDI if you want to boost the exports from India to Korea, and if you invest in India, you say, then you also have more control over the production, making the exports easier. Thank you. Dr. Schindler, I think looking at the time, we'll have a last question from the audience to you. Just going back to the textile machinery producers, also an important part of the supply chain. The question that came in is, all leading textile machine producers have set up shop in China. What should India do to attract FDI in textile machinery production?
Well, thank you. Interesting questions. Well, FDI in textile machinery production is happening if the overall production costs are lower than elsewhere. And if technology is not yet available in a country, imports of important parts need to be possible. Manufacturing in China of machinery started with machines locally assembled with a big portion of imported key parts from Europe. With time, this amount fell and local production increased. So the message behind this explanation is that you have to allow imports of important parts from other countries. Just like in apparel production, you have to allow imports of needed fabrics to assemble in China and then build on that and build the qualifications to then produce more and more of these parts yourself in your country.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's a very clear message, and that brings me to the wrap up of this session, because I personally think there have been many clear messages in this panel discussion. I think good policy IDs, business IDs, good policy IDs. So the question of how to boost the FDI in apparel textile sector in the Indian subcontinent, particularly in India, of course, has been extensively answered. So I would really like to thank you for that, Dr. Schindler, Chairman Sung, for sharing your ideas, your knowledge from your own experience, from your research with us. It has been a pleasure and a privilege to moderate this session. I hope the audience has enjoyed it as much as I have, and I would like to wish you success with Youngone, ITMF in this fabulous and complex business. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. I enjoyed.
Thank you, Matthijs. It was a great session. Thank you, Chairman.
Great session, yes.
We thank our distinguished moderator and all our eminent speakers for their valuable inputs in this session. And with that, we sign off from Hall 1 for day 1 of this conclave. And tomorrow we will be logging in and commencing with the proceedings of our session at 9:30 a.m. India Standard Time. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening.